Right now, as you listen to these words, a storm might be raging across the surface of the western Pacific Ocean. Gale force winds could be tearing the crests off 40-foot waves, hurling sea spray into a darkened sky, while lightning illuminates the chaotic, violent boundary between the atmosphere and the sea. It is a world of fury, driven by the immense thermal engine of our star, the sun. But if you were to slip beneath those violently churning waves and begin to sink, the roar of the wind would immediately muffle into a distant, rhythmic thrum. As you leave the sunlit surface behind, the chaos of the weather fades into irrelevance. You are entering a realm where the sun has no jurisdiction, a world governed by ancient immutable forces that operate on timescales far beyond human comprehension. 7 miles straight down, at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench, in a depression known as the Challenger Deep, there is only silence, cold, and a crushing, unimaginable weight. It is the most remote place on our planet, a hidden canyon plunging nearly 36,000 feet into the Earth's crust. If you were to drop Mount Everest into this trench, its summit would still be submerged beneath more than a mile of dark water. For millions of years, this abyssal world has existed in a state of near-perfect stasis, completely isolated from the rise and fall of civilizations, the shifting of surface climates, and the catastrophic extinctions that have periodically scrubbed the continents clean. It is a world that does not know we exist, and yet it is a world teeming with mysteries we are only just beginning to understand. Tonight, we are going to journey into that absolute darkness. We are going to explore the geological violence that carved this scar into the earth, the history of the scientists who dared to look into the abyss, and most importantly, the alien biology of the creatures that call this crushing void their home. We are going to ask what still hides in the vast unexplored stretches of the Hadal zone, where no human eye and no robotic camera has ever peered. Because the truth is, we have mapped the dry, dusty surface of Mars, tens of millions of miles away, with far greater resolution than we have mapped the bottom of our own ocean. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I am always curious to see how far these stories travel across the surface world. Dim the lights if you have not already. Take a deep breath, hold it for a moment, and let the frantic pace of the modern world slowly exhale from your lungs. Listen to the steady, rhythmic sound of your own breathing, and imagine it synchronizing with the slow, eternal currents of the deep ocean. We are going to descend together, leaving the light behind, to uncover the secrets of a realm where the rules of biology are pushed to their absolute breaking point. The story of the Mariana Trench begins long before the first humans looked out across the ocean and wondered what lay beneath. It begins with the slow, grinding machinery of plate tectonics. The Earth's crust is not a solid shell, but a fractured puzzle of massive rocky plates floating on a sea of semi-molten mantle. In the western Pacific, 2 of these immense slabs are locked in a slow-motion collision that has been unfolding for more than 50 million years. The vast, heavy Pacific plate, which is over 170 million years old, is cold, dense, and sinking. As it grinds against the lighter, younger Mariana plate, it is forced downward, plunging deep into the Earth's mantle in a process called subduction. This epic geological struggle is what pulls the ocean floor downward, carving a crescent-shaped trench over 1,500 miles long and averaging 43 miles wide. The sheer scale of this geological feature is difficult to process. The pressures generated by this tectonic collision are so immense that they literally melt solid rock, feeding the chain of active volcanoes that make up the Mariana Islands. But it is the depth of the trench that defies imagination. To understand the extreme environment of the Mariana Trench, we have to understand the physical reality of water pressure. Water is heavy. A single cubic meter of seawater weighs slightly more than a metric ton. As you descend into the ocean, the weight of the water above you stacks up, pressing in from all sides with unrelenting force. For every 33 feet you descend, the pressure increases by 1 atmosphere, which is equivalent to the normal air pressure we feel at sea level. By the time you reach the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the pressure is a staggering 1,000 atmospheres. That is over 16,000 pounds of force pressing against every single square inch of surface area. To put that into perspective, it is roughly equivalent to having the weight of 50 jumbo jets balanced on your body, or an elephant standing on your thumb. Under this kind of pressure, the very chemistry of life begins to fail. Cell membranes, normally fluid and flexible, compress and freeze into rigid, non-functional sheets. The complex folded structures of proteins, which act as the microscopic machinery of living cells, are physically crushed, losing their shape and rendering them useless. Even water molecules themselves are squeezed closer together, increasing the density of the seawater. For a very long time, the scientific consensus was that life in such an environment was a biomechanical impossibility. In the mid-19th century, a prominent naturalist named Edward Forbes proposed what became known as the Azoic hypothesis. After extensively dredging the Aegean Sea, Forbes noticed that the variety and quantity of marine life steadily decreased the deeper he went. Applying a seemingly flawless rational logic to his observations, he extrapolated that life must eventually fade out entirely. He declared that below a depth of 1,800 feet, the ocean was a barren, lifeless desert, devoid of light, starved of oxygen, and crushed by pressure. It was a perfectly reasonable assumption for the 1840s. Without sunlight, there could be no plants. Without plants, there could be no herbivores, and without herbivores, no predators. The deep ocean was viewed as a watery tomb, a dark abyss where nothing could ever stir. But nature, as it so often does, proved our assumptions spectacularly wrong. The dismantling of the Azoic hypothesis began in the late 19th century with the voyage of the HMS Challenger. From 1872 to 1876, this retrofitted British naval vessel crisscrossed the globe, dragging nets and lowering sounding weights into the unknown depths. Measuring the depth of the ocean in the 19th century was an act of brutal, exhausting physical labor. It involved unspooling thousands of fathoms of hemp rope attached to a heavy lead weight, letting it free fall into the dark until the crew felt the sudden slackening that indicated it had struck bottom. Then, it took hours of agonizing effort by the crew, turning massive wooden winches to haul the wet, heavy rope back to the deck. Despite the crude technology, the Challenger expedition made discoveries that shattered the scientific consensus. Their nets pulled up bizarre, gelatinous creatures, blind crustaceans and strange fishes from depths far exceeding Edward Forbes's Azoic boundary. They proved that life existed in the cold and the dark. More importantly for our story, on March 23, 1875, the crew of the Challenger lowered their sounding rope into a region of the Pacific Ocean near the Mariana Islands. The rope spun off the wooden drums, descending deeper and deeper into the water, past 2,000 fathoms, past 3,000 fathoms, until it finally came to rest at a depth of 4,475 fathoms, or 26,850 feet. They had inadvertently discovered the Mariana Trench, but even they could not have realized they were hovering over the deepest chasm on the face of the earth. It would take nearly another century and the invention of entirely new technologies for humanity to finally touch the absolute bottom of the world. In the decades that followed, the invention of sonar allowed scientists to map the ocean floor using sound waves instead of weighted ropes. Echo sounders pinged the bottom, revealing that the ocean floor was not a flat, featureless plain, but a rugged landscape of towering underwater mountains, vast plateaus, and deep plunging canyons. In 1951, the British survey ship HMS Challenger 2 returned to the Mariana Trench and, using acoustic sounding, pinpointed a depression that was far deeper than anything measured before. They named it the Challenger Deep, but knowing it was there was not the same as going there. The pressures at 36,000 feet were thought to be insurmountable for human engineering. A traditional submarine would be imploded instantly, crushed like an aluminum can before it had even completed a fraction of the descent. To reach the bottom, humanity would need a completely different kind of vessel. They would need a bathyscaphe, a dirigible of the deep, designed not to withstand the pressure by sheer strength, but to equalize it. This extraordinary machine was the Trieste, and its historic dive on January 23, 1960, stands as one of the greatest and most terrifying adventures in the history of human exploration. Two men, Swiss oceanographer Jacques Picard and United States Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh, sealed themselves inside a spherical steel cabin beneath a massive float filled with tens of thousands of gallons of gasoline. Because gasoline is lighter than water and nearly incompressible, it provided the necessary buoyancy, while tons of iron pellets served as ballast. Their descent was a slow, agonizing fall into absolute sensory deprivation. For hours, they sank through the water column, watching the sunlight fade from vibrant blue to deep indigo, and finally to a pitch-black void that no sunbeam had ever penetrated. The temperature outside the sphere plummeted to just above freezing. The silence inside their tiny, cramped cabin was broken only by the steady hum of their instruments and the occasional terrifying creak of the steel hull compressing under the mounting pressure. At a depth of 30,000 feet, an explosive cracking sound echoed through the vessel. The immense pressure had cracked one of the outer plexiglass window panes. The men exchanged a look of profound realization. They were separated from instant, violent death by a few inches of steel and acrylic, and there was no possibility of rescue. If the hull failed, they would not even have time to register the event before they ceased to exist. Yet, they made the decision to continue. They pushed past the fear, driven by the fundamental human need to know what lies in the dark. Finally, after nearly 5 hours of sinking, the Trieste settled onto the powdery yellowish silt of the Challenger Deep. They had reached the absolute bottom. As they peered through the single thick window, illuminated by the bright beam of their external spotlight, they saw something that forever changed our understanding of extreme biology. Slowly swimming across the illuminated patch of sediment was a flatfish, resembling a sole or flounder, and a small red shrimp. In the deepest, most crushing environment on the planet, an environment that physics suggested should be utterly sterile, life was casually going about its business. The significance of that moment cannot be overstated. It meant that life does not just cling to the edges of the extreme. It colonizes it, adapts to it, and thrives within it. but Picard and Walsh could only stay on the bottom for 20 minutes before they had to begin the long ascent back to the surface world. They had briefly illuminated a tiny fraction of a massive alien ecosystem, a fleeting glimpse through a keyhole into a mansion of the dark. Today, decades later, the Hadal zone remains the largest unexplored habitat on Earth. We have sent a handful of uncrewed submersibles and a few more daring explorers back to the Challenger Deep, but these expeditions are the equivalent of dropping a flashlight into a massive darkened warehouse for a few minutes and claiming to know everything inside. The trench is vast, complex, and full of shadowed crevices and hidden plains. As you lie there, feeling the weight of your own body relaxing against the mattress, try to imagine the sheer volume of that unseen space. Think of the miles of dark water pressing down, isolating the trench from everything we know. The creatures that live down there have evolved in a completely parallel universe. They do not rely on the sun. Their eyes, if they have them at all, are designed to detect the faint ghostly glow of bioluminescence, the only light created in the abyss. Their bodies are built of specialized proteins and cellular structures that use chemicals like trimethylamine oxide to prevent themselves from being crushed into biological paste. They are slow, ancient, and perfectly adapted to a world that would instantly destroy us. In the chapters to come, we will explore the precise mechanisms these unseen creatures use to survive, the bizarre and terrifying forms they might take, and the profound philosophical implications of a biome that continues to exist entirely without our awareness. We will build a picture of an alien world right here on Earth, a world of scavengers waiting for falls of organic snow from above, of predators with jaws unhinged in the dark, of microscopic forests feeding on the chemical energy of the Earth itself. It is a journey into the absolute unknown, a descent into a quiet, cold serenity that is the perfect antidote to the noise and chaos of the surface. Let the darkness of the trench mirror the darkness of your room. Let the slow, crushing pressure become a gentle, comforting weight pulling you down into sleep. The mysteries of the deep are waiting, and we have all the time in the world to explore them. To understand what might still be hiding in the unexplored reaches of the Mariana Trench, we must first understand the brutal, unyielding rules of survival that govern the Hadal zone. When Jacques Picard and Don Walsh looked out of the Trieste in 1960, they saw a flatfish and a shrimp, proving that life could exist at the very bottom of the world. But their brief glimpse told us nothing about how that life survives. The deep ocean is not a place that forgives biological mistakes. It is an environment of absolute scarcity, absolute darkness, and absolute pressure. On the surface of the Earth, the foundation of almost every food web is sunlight. Plants and phytoplankton capture the energy of the sun and convert it into the sugars that fuel the rest of the living world. But in the trench, the sun is a myth. The ecosystem here runs on a different, much slower economy, one based almost entirely on gravity and death. Imagine standing in a dark, quiet forest where the only food comes from a slow, unending snowfall of organic debris drifting down from the sky. This is the reality for the creatures of the abyss. Biologists call it marine snow. It is a continuous shower of dead algae, decaying fecal matter, scraps of flesh, and microscopic carcasses falling from the productive sunlit waters miles above. It is a slow-motion rain of sustenance, taking weeks or even months to drift down to the trench floor. By the time it reaches the bottom, it has been scavenged and re-scavenged by creatures higher up in the water column, leaving only the most recalcitrant scraps for the inhabitants of the Hadal zone. Because food is so incredibly scarce, life in the trench moves at a glacial pace. To conserve energy, Many abyssal creatures have abandoned the fast predatory lifestyles of their surface counterparts. They do not chase prey. They wait. They are masters of patience, drifting in the dark or sitting motionless on the soft yellowish ooze of the sea floor for weeks, months, or perhaps even years, waiting for a meal to drift within reach. But occasionally, the slow rain of marine snow is interrupted by a catastrophic windfall. A massive surface predator, perhaps a 60-ton sperm whale or a great white shark, dies, and its enormous carcass begins to sink. It falls through the twilight zone, past the midnight zone, and eventually crashes into the abyssal plain. In the nutrient-starved world of the deep, a whale fall is the equivalent of an oasis appearing in a desert. It is a sudden, massive influx of energy that can sustain an entire localized ecosystem for decades. Within hours of the carcass hitting the bottom, the scavengers arrive. Blind, primitive hagfish, sensing the chemical plume of death from miles away, converge on the carcass, tying their bodies into knots to tear off chunks of rotting flesh. Giant amphipods, crustaceans that look like pale, terrifying woodlice the size of footballs, swarm over the bones, their powerful mandibles slicing through blubber and muscle. Slowly, over years, the carcass is stripped down to the bone, and then specialized bacteria take over, breaking down the lipids inside the skeleton itself. The biological economy of the trench is one of extreme boom and bust, and the creatures that live there must be adapted to survive both. But starvation is only one of the challenges. The more formidable barrier to life is the physical weight of the ocean itself. As we established, the pressure at the bottom of the Mariana Trench is roughly 1,000 times greater than at the surface. To a human, this pressure would be instantly fatal, crushing the air spaces in our bodies and collapsing our lungs. But the creatures of the trench do not have air spaces. Their bodies are made mostly of water, and water is relatively incompressible. The real danger of extreme pressure is not gross physical crushing, but microscopic biochemical sabotage. Under the immense weight of 36,000 feet of water, the very molecules of life are squeezed together, altering their shapes and their functions. Cell membranes, the critical boundaries that keep a cell intact and allow it to communicate with its environment, rely on a delicate balance of fluidity. At normal pressures, the lipids that make up these membranes move freely, like a layer of liquid oil. But under Hadal pressures, these lipids are packed so tightly together that they freeze, turning the membrane into a rigid, impenetrable wall. A cell with a frozen membrane is a dead cell. Furthermore, the proteins that perform almost all the work inside a cell, the enzymes that digest food, the structures that build muscles, the receptors that sense the environment, are incredibly complex folded molecules. Their function depends entirely on their specific three-dimensional shape. Extreme pressure forces water molecules into the tiny crevices of these folded proteins, wedging them apart and unfolding them in a process called denaturation. It is the exact same process that occurs when you boil an egg, permanently altering the structure of the proteins. So how do the creatures of the Mariana Trench prevent their cells from freezing and their proteins from unraveling? The answer lies in a remarkable piece of biochemical engineering. Many deep-sea animals have evolved to pack their tissues with a specialized class of molecules called piezolites, from the Greek word for pressure. The most common of these piezolites is a chemical called trimethylamine oxide. Trimethylamine oxide acts as a microscopic structural support system. It binds to the water molecules inside the cell, preventing them from forcing their way into the folded proteins and ensuring that the cell membranes remain fluid and functional despite the crushing weight of the ocean. It is a brilliant evolutionary workaround. But here is where the story takes a fascinating and deeply mysterious turn. Trimethylamine oxide is highly effective, but it has a limit. As a fish descends deeper into the ocean, it must pack more and more of this chemical into its cells to counteract the increasing pressure. However, trimethylamine oxide also alters the osmotic balance of the fish's body, drawing water into its tissues. At a certain depth, the concentration of the chemical required to survive the pressure becomes so high that the fish would become hopelessly waterlogged, its cells swelling and bursting from the osmotic imbalance. Biologists have calculated this theoretical limit, and it sits at approximately 27,000 feet. Below 27,000 feet, the concentration of trimethylamine oxide required to keep proteins from crushing would be toxic to any known fish. And this is exactly what modern deep-sea expeditions have found. When robotic landers are dropped into the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench, they find a thriving community of fish in the upper Hadal zone. They find the Mariana snailfish, a bizarre, translucent creature with no scales, tiny eyes, and a gelatinous body that looks more like a swimming ghost than a fish. These snailfish are the apex predators of their dark domain, gliding gracefully through the freezing water, feeding on small crustaceans. But as the robotic landers descend past 27,000 feet, the snailfish vanish. They simply stop appearing on the cameras. At 30,000 feet, 33,000 feet, and all the way down to the 36,000-foot floor of the Challenger Deep, no fish have ever been observed. The theoretical limit seems to hold true. The deepest reaches of the trench appear to be a completely fishless environment. But the absence of fish does not mean an absence of life. It simply means that whatever lives in the deepest, darkest, most crushing crevices of the earth must operate on biological principles we have not yet fully documented. When we look past the 27,000-foot boundary, the ecosystem shifts entirely to invertebrates. We find massive pale amphipods scavenging on whatever falls from above. We find sea cucumbers, strange fleshy tubes that crawl blindly across the sediment, vacuuming up organic detritus. And we find foraminifera, single-celled organisms that build delicate, intricate shells out of sand and glued-together debris. But these are just the creatures that happen to wander into the narrow beams of our robotic lights, attracted by the bait we drop to lure them in. What about the creatures that do not care about our bait? What about the predators that hunt the giant amphipods, the biological oddities that have spent tens of millions of years evolving in complete, undisturbed isolation? The Mariana Trench is not a flat bowl. It is a complex geological structure full of sheer cliff faces, deep, jagged fissures, and massive rock falls. The total volume of water contained within the trench is staggering, and we have visually inspected perhaps a fraction of 1% of it. It is entirely possible, even probable, that there are macroscopic creatures living in the Hadal zone that possess completely unknown biochemical adaptations. Perhaps there are invertebrates that have evolved alternative molecules to trimethylamine oxide, allowing them to grow to massive sizes despite the pressure. The phenomenon of abyssal gigantism is already well documented. The amphipods in the trench are 10 times larger than their shallow water relatives, and the colossal squid grows to terrifying proportions in the deep ocean. What forces of gigantism might be at work in the deep, unexplored canyons of the Mariana Plate? Imagine a creature perfectly adapted to a world without light, without seasons, and without sound as we know it. Its body would be profoundly soft, composed of specialized, incompressible gels and fluids, lacking the heavy calcified bones that characterize surface animals. It would not need eyes, relying instead on incredibly sensitive lateral lines to detect the faintest vibrations in the water, the subtle hydrodynamic wake of a swimming amphipod miles away. It might communicate through low-frequency pulses, feeling the world through pressure waves rather than seeing it. Such a creature could be the size of a school bus, drifting silently through the pitch-black water, a ghost of the deep, a phantom biological empire that has existed beneath our feet since before the first primates descended from the trees. The possibility of such creatures forces us to reconsider our place in the biological hierarchy of the Earth. We consider ourselves the masters of the planet, the apex of evolution, because we have conquered the surface, the air, and the shallow margins of the sea. But the surface is only a thin, volatile membrane stretched over a massive deep-water world. The volume of the deep ocean dwarfs the terrestrial biosphere. In terms of sheer living space, the Earth is overwhelmingly a dark, cold, high-pressure environment. The creatures of the trench, the known and the unknown, are the true inheritors of the Earth, perfectly adapted to its most abundant habitat. They exist in a state of eternal, serene isolation. They do not know of the storms raging on the surface, the rise and fall of our technological empires, or the existential anxieties that plague the human mind. Their reality is the slow, steady current, the gentle rain of marine snow, and the comforting, absolute embrace of the dark. As you lie there, let your mind sink into that darkness. Imagine the immense weight of the water above you, not as a crushing force, but as a heavy protective blanket sealing you off from the noise and the demands of the world above. Let the frantic pace of your thoughts slow to match the glacial metabolism of the deep. In the unseen depths of the Mariana Trench, there is no urgency, no stress, no future to worry about, and no past to regret. There is only the long, eternal present of the abyss. As we prepare to explore further down, into the deepest, most inaccessible fissures where no probe has ever ventured, let the serene emptiness of the Hadal zone wash over you. Let the mystery of what lies hidden in the dark be a source of comfort, a reminder that the universe is still vast, strange, and beautifully indifferent to our small human concerns. As we continue our descent, leaving behind the theoretical boundaries of where fish can survive, the nature of the abyss begins to shift. We are no longer merely falling through empty water. We are approaching the physical skin of the Earth, the very bedrock of the planet. But the bottom of the Mariana Trench is not a flat plain of silt, as one might imagine a vast desert to be. It is a landscape of profound geological violence, frozen in slow motion over millions of years. This is the boundary line where the massive Pacific Plate, heavy with the weight of 170 million years of accumulated sediment, is being shoved relentlessly beneath the Mariana Plate. The friction of this planetary collision generates deep, ragged canyons, towering underwater cliffs, and jagged fissures that plunge even further into the dark crust. It is a terrain of absolute desolation, carved by forces so immense they make surface hurricanes seem like a passing breeze. In these deepest, most inaccessible crevices, the darkness is absolute, but the Earth itself provides a different kind of energy. If we were to navigate a robotic submersible into one of these hidden valleys, we might notice a strange shimmering in the water ahead. It is the visual distortion caused by extreme heat meeting extreme cold, much like the mirage you see rising from a sun-baked highway. Here, at the bottom of the world, where the ambient water temperature hovers just above freezing, the Earth is bleeding intense, searing heat into the ocean. These are hydrothermal vents, the geysers of the deep. And they are the engines of a biological reality that completely shattered our understanding of how life works. For human history, and for a good portion of modern scientific inquiry, it was an unquestioned law of nature that all life ultimately depended on the sun. Plants capture solar radiation through photosynthesis, converting it into the chemical energy that feeds the herbivores, which in turn feed the carnivores. Even the scavengers we discussed earlier, waiting patiently for the slow rain of marine snow, are fundamentally part of this sun-driven economy. They survive on the leftovers of the surface world. But in the late 1970s, geologists exploring the deep ocean ridges made a discovery that was as paradigm-shifting as finding life on another planet. They found sprawling ecosystems, dense with exotic organisms, clustered around cracks in the Earth's crust where superheated water was billowing out. These communities were completely and utterly disconnected from the sun. They were powered by a process called chemosynthesis. Seawater seeps through microscopic cracks in the ocean floor, traveling down into the Earth's crust, where it approaches the molten magma chamber beneath. The water is superheated to temperatures exceeding 700 degrees Fahrenheit. At surface pressure, this water would instantly boil into steam, but under the crushing weight of hundreds of atmospheres, it remains in a liquid state, dissolving vast quantities of minerals from the surrounding rocks, particularly sulfur, iron, and copper. This mineral-laden fluid shoots back up and erupts into the freezing ocean. As it hits the cold water, the dissolved minerals instantly precipitate out, forming towering chimney-like structures and billowing clouds of black mineral-rich smoke. It is a toxic, boiling environment that seems perfectly designed to destroy life. Yet, it is here that life flourishes in some of the densest concentrations found anywhere in the ocean. The foundation of this alien food web is not a plant, but a bacterium. These extremophile bacteria have evolved the miraculous ability to process the toxic hydrogen sulfide spewing from the vents, using the chemical energy locked within the Earth's crust to synthesize organic matter. They are literally eating the rocks and the toxic gas. These bacteria live in symbiotic harmony inside the bodies of massive, bizarre creatures. Imagine tube worms stretching up to 8 feet long, with brilliant blood-red plumes extending from their stark white cylinders. These worms have no mouth, no stomach, and no digestive tract. Their entire body cavity is packed with billions of chemosynthetic bacteria. The worm's red plume extracts oxygen and hydrogen sulfide from the water and delivers it to the bacteria, which in turn provide the worm with a steady supply of energy. It is a closed-loop biological engine running entirely on geothermal heat. Around these forests of tube worms crawl blind, ghost white crabs and squat lobsters, all partaking in an ecosystem that does not care whether the sun shines or whether the surface world freezes over. But the vents discovered so far are mostly located along mid-ocean ridges at depths of roughly 10,000 feet. The deepest parts of the Mariana Trench, descending past 36,000 feet, represent an even more extreme frontier. What happens when the violent geology of the trench floor creates fissures that seep chemical energy into the ultimate pressure cooker of the Challenger Deep? We have not mapped the vast majority of these deepest canyons. It is highly probable that in the undiscovered recesses of the Mariana Plate, there are hydrothermal fields that make the known vent communities look entirely tame. We can speculate about the kinds of creatures that might have evolved in these hidden oases. If a tube worm can grow to 8 feet long at 10,000 feet of depth, What might those same symbiotic relationships produce after tens of millions of years of undisturbed evolution in the isolated valleys of the trench? Perhaps there are immense reef-building organisms constructing sprawling, calcified cities around slow-leaking methane seeps. These structures could span for miles across the abyssal floor, glowing faintly with the biological light of specialized bacteria designed to attract symbiotic partners. Imagine a creature perfectly adapted to harvest the slow, steady seepage of serpentinization, a geological process where water reacts with mantle rocks to produce hydrogen. This creature might not look like an animal as we understand it. It might be a sprawling colonial organism, a vast network of biological tissue interwoven with the porous rock, growing at an incredibly slow rate, measuring its lifespan not in years but in millennia. It would simply sit in the dark, bathed in the crushing pressure, slowly metabolizing the chemical breath of the earth. Predators in this hidden world would have to be equally slow, equally methodical. Perhaps there are giant blind cephalopods that drift along these chemical reefs, using long, sensitive tentacles to probe the crevices for a slow-moving meal. Their brains would process information with a deliberate, calculated efficiency born of millions of years of extreme adaptation. The Mariana Trench is not just a geological oddity. It is a window into the broader possibilities of the cosmos. It is a working model of how life might exist in the cold, dark voids between the stars. And this realization should bring us a strange kind of comfort. We often look up at the night sky and feel a sense of profound isolation, a fear that our thin, fragile biosphere is a lonely anomaly in a dead universe. But when we look down into the deepest, darkest cracks of our own planet, we find that life is far more resilient and stubborn than we ever dared to imagine. It does not require the warmth of a star or the gentle breeze of an atmosphere. It simply requires a chemical gradient and the inexorable march of time. The unmapped entities of the deep fissures are our distant alien cousins, thriving in a world that would extinguish us in a fraction of a second. As you lie there, feeling the weight of the day slowly lifting from your mind, try to hold on to that thought. The struggles and anxieties of the surface world, the endless noise of human civilization, all of it is confined to a vanishingly thin layer of air and light. Beneath that frantic surface, the vast majority of our planet's living space rests in absolute, undisturbed silence. The slow, rhythmic pulse of the Earth's heat provides all the comfort and sustenance that the deep ocean needs. Imagine yourself drifting down into that silent, heavy world. You are unburdened by the need to breathe, unharmed by the pressure, simply a detached observer floating in the pristine darkness. In this abyss, there is no rush, no sudden movement to break the infinite calm. The world here breathes in eons, not seconds, offering a serene sanctuary from the rapid, relentless pace of the surface. Let the immense, crushing pressure of the ocean become a metaphor for deep, profound relaxation. It is a weight that does not harm, but gently holds you safe and isolated from the waking hours. As we navigate away from the searing, toxic oases of the hydrothermal vents, steering our imaginary vessel back into the vast, open water column hovering just above the abyssal plain, the absolute darkness of the Hadal zone rushes back in to envelop us. To the human mind, darkness is traditionally associated with emptiness, a terrifying void where our primary sense, our vision, is rendered entirely useless. We are creatures of the light, fundamentally shaped by the diurnal rhythms of a star that sits 93 million miles away. When we close our eyes, or when we are plunged into pitch blackness, our brains panic, desperately searching for visual input that simply is not there. But this panic is a symptom of our surface-dwelling bias. In the depths of the Mariana Trench, darkness is not an absence. It is a dense physical medium, a vast three-dimensional canvas upon which an entirely different kind of sensory reality is painted. To understand the creatures that lurk in the unmapped fissures of the earth, we must abandon our reliance on the sun and learn to perceive the world exactly as they do. We must learn to see the invisible, hear the silent, and feel the microscopic vibrations of the deep. The first truth we must accept is that the deep ocean is not entirely dark. It is, instead, illuminated by a biological galaxy of cold chemical stars. While sunlight can penetrate no further than 3,000 feet below the surface, the creatures of the deep have evolved their own internalized illumination, a phenomenon known as bioluminescence. Through a complex chemical reaction involving a light-emitting molecule called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase, these animals can produce brilliant flashes of blue and green light. Because red light is the first wavelength to be absorbed by seawater, red creatures are essentially invisible in the abyss, cloaked in perfect camouflage. But blue and green light travels efficiently through the water. In the crushing blackness of the trench, a sudden bright flash is not a comforting beacon. It is a weapon, a lure, or a desperate scream for help. Imagine a predator, perhaps a descendant of ancient soft-bodied cephalopods, drifting silently through the 30,000-foot mark. It possesses no image-forming eyes, but rather specialized arrays of photoreceptors scattered across its mantle, sensitive to the faintest photon strikes. It trails a long, delicate tentacle tipped with a glowing, bioluminescent lure, a tiny, pulsing point of blue light in an endless void. To a starving scavenger, that light is an irresistible promise of sustenance. But the moment the scavenger approaches, the light vanishes and the trap snaps shut. Bioluminescence is not just for hunting. It is also used as a sophisticated defense mechanism, a tactic biologists grimly refer to as the burglar alarm. When certain deep-sea jellyfish are attacked by a predator in the dark, they do not attempt to flee because fleeing costs precious metabolic energy. Instead, they ignite their entire bodies in a dazzling, rotating pinwheel of bright blue light. The logic is brutal and brilliant. The display acts as a massive visual siren, illuminating the attacker and signaling to even larger, more terrifying predators lurking in the distance that a meal is currently distracted and vulnerable. The prey sacrifices itself, or uses the ensuing chaos to ensure its attacker becomes the hunted. It is a spectacular, deadly light show playing out in total silence, hundreds of miles away from any human observer, a private cosmic ballet that has been rehearsing its steps for tens of millions of years. Yet, even with these localized flashes of biological light, vision is a poor tool in the Hadal zone. The true masters of this environment rely on senses we can barely comprehend. Water is a dense, incompressible fluid, and because of this density, it transmits kinetic energy incredibly efficiently. Every movement, every beat of a fin, every snap of a jaw creates a tiny, rippling pressure wave that radiates outward. The creatures that inhabit the trench possess an intricate network of sensory organs running along their bodies called the lateral line system. This system is composed of microscopic hairs suspended in fluid-filled canals, directly wired into the creature's nervous system. These hairs are so unfathomably sensitive that they can detect the minute displacement of water caused by an animal swimming hundreds of yards away. To a creature equipped with a Hadal lateral line, the ocean is not a dark, empty space. It is a highly detailed three-dimensional tactile map. They do not need to see their prey. They can feel its exact size, speed, and trajectory. They experience the ocean as a symphony of physical vibrations, a continuous overlapping wave of tactile information that paints a picture far more accurate than our own eyes ever could. And then there is the soundscape. We think of the deep ocean as a realm of absolute silence, but that is a profound misconception. Sound travels nearly 5 times faster in water than it does in the air, and low-frequency sounds can travel for thousands of miles with very little loss of energy. The Mariana Trench is an acoustic canyon, a massive dish that catches and funnels the deep resonating noises of the planet. If you were to drop a specialized hydrophone to the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the recording would not be silent. You would hear the low, terrifying subterranean groans of the Pacific Plate grinding against the Mariana Plate, the acoustic signature of earthquakes happening deep within the Earth's mantle. You might hear the distant, distorted calls of baleen whales echoing down from the surface, a ghostly, mournful singing that filters down through 6 miles of water. And you would hear the subtle rhythmic thrumming of the ocean's massive slow-moving currents, the circulatory system of the planet moving millions of tons of freezing water across the abyssal plains. For the creatures that live here, the world is a rich auditory tapestry. Because sensory input in the trench is so different, and because energy is so staggeringly scarce, the very concept of time is warped in the Hadal zone. On the surface, our lives are dictated by the rapid cycle of day and night, the quick changing of the seasons, and the fast, frantic metabolism of warm-blooded mammals. We live fast and we die quickly. But in an environment where the temperature hovers perpetually just above freezing and where a meal might only arrive once a decade, living fast is an evolutionary death sentence. To survive the absolute bottom of the world, you must slow down. Deep-sea metabolisms operate at a fraction of the speed of surface animals. We already know that certain deep-water sharks can live for over 400 years, moving with a sluggish, hypnotic grace through the freezing northern oceans. It is entirely plausible, mathematically and biologically, that the unmapped trenches harbor creatures that measure their lifespans not in years but in millennia. Consider the xenophyophores, a dominant form of life in the Mariana Trench that challenges everything we understand about biological complexity. These are not multicellular animals. They are single-celled organisms, giant amoebas that construct elaborate, fragile, sponge-like shells out of sand, the remains of other creatures, and their own fecal matter. What is truly staggering is their size. A single cell can grow to be the size of a dinner plate. They sit motionless on the abyssal plain, slowly extracting organic particles from the sediment, surviving in an environment laced with toxic levels of heavy metals and radiation that would kill a human instantly. Because their metabolism is virtually undetectable, it is incredibly difficult to determine how old a giant xenophyophore might be. They could be hundreds, perhaps thousands of years old. An individual cell sitting on the bottom of the Challenger Deep right now might have begun its life before the first human empires were built. To a creature that lives for thousands of years in absolute darkness, what is the meaning of a day? Time is not a fast-flowing river. It is a stagnant, heavy pool. This radical stretching of time, this complete detachment from the solar rhythms that govern our existence, offers a profound philosophical shift. When we look at the world, we assume that our perception of time and space is the objective reality of the universe. We measure history by the rise of technology and the span of human generations. But the creatures of the trench mock our frantic, brief existence. They have been carrying out their slow, silent lives for tens of millions of years, entirely ignorant of the dramas playing out on the continents above. It invites us to reconsider the importance we place on our own fleeting anxieties. If a creature can exist in the freezing blackness for 5,000 years, perfectly content in its slow, unchanging routine, then perhaps our endless pursuit of speed and progress is simply a biological quirk, not a universal mandate. If a species can thrive for eons without ever seeing the sun, without ever experiencing a summer or a winter, without ever moving faster than a slow crawl, it forces us to ask, what is the true nature of existence on this planet? We are the anomaly. The rapid, noisy, light-filled biosphere of the surface is a thin, volatile aberration. The slow, dark, crushing eternity of the deep ocean is the true baseline of the Earth. As you prepare your mind for rest, try to adopt the sensory reality of the Hadal zone. Close your eyes and let go of your reliance on the visual world. Imagine the darkness around you not as an empty space, but as a comforting, dense medium that holds you securely in place. Focus on the physical sensations of your body, the gentle pressure of the mattress against your back, the slow, rhythmic rising and falling of your chest, mirroring the eternal currents of the deep sea. Listen to the quietness of your room, allowing the faint, distant sounds of the surface world to fade into insignificance, just as the sound of storms fades before reaching the trench. Let your perception of time stretch and slow. You do not need to rush towards sleep. You only need to drift, patiently, effortlessly, like an ancient creature suspended in the crushing, peaceful dark. The weight of the water above is not a burden. It is a shield, protecting you from the demands of the daylight. There is no hurry. There is no urgency. There is only the long, deep, unbroken silence of the abyss, waiting to gently embrace you. The deepest trenches of the ocean present biological challenges that go far beyond crushing pressure and absolute lack of sunlight. Perhaps the most profound existential problem for any complex organism living in the Hadal zone is the sheer incomprehensible vastness of the empty space. On the surface, animals are constrained by physical geography, funneled into narrow valleys or confined to specific forests, which naturally forces populations into close proximity. But the pelagic zone of the deep ocean is the largest continuous habitat on the planet, an unimaginable volume of dark water where physical barriers do not exist. For a macroscopic creature swimming freely through the abyssal zones, the population density is so vanishingly low that the mathematical probability of ever encountering another member of its own species by pure chance is practically zero. How does life propagate in a void so vast that an animal might swim for 5 decades without ever sensing another of its kind? We find the blueprint for these extreme survival strategies in the bizarre reproductive biology of the deep-sea anglerfish. A male anglerfish is born into a desperate reality. He is an infinitesimal fraction of the female's size, completely incapable of hunting, and defined entirely by a pair of wildly oversized olfactory organs. He is essentially a swimming, starving nose, frantically sniffing the pitch-black water for the faint chemical pheromone trail of a female. If, against all mathematical odds, he detects her scent and tracks her down, he does not merely mate and swim away. Instead, he bites aggressively into her flesh and never lets go. Over the following weeks, the skin of the male's mouth fuses seamlessly with the skin of the female. His eyes, fins, and internal organs atrophy and dissolve. Finally, their circulatory systems merge, and their bloodstreams become one single fluid network. The male ceases to exist as an autonomous creature, reduced to a parasitic appendage permanently grafted to the female's body. This phenomenon, known as sexual parasitism, shatters our surface-dwelling illusions about the sanctity and permanence of the individual organism. We inherently think of an animal as a discrete, bounded entity, preserving its own bodily borders. But in the deep ocean, the boundary between the self and the other is a biological luxury that survival simply cannot afford. As we descend, plunging past the 27,000-foot boundary and into the unmapped canyons of the Mariana Trench, the sheer emptiness becomes even more profound. The unknown creatures that inhabit these deepest, most isolated fissures must possess reproductive strategies that push biological logic further into the realm of the alien. Imagine an undiscovered species of giant, soft-bodied invertebrate, perhaps a distant descendant of ancient comb jellies, uniquely adapted to the crushing weight of the Challenger Deep. This speculative creature might live for 500 years, drifting blindly through the black water at a speed of mere inches per day. Because the metabolic energy required to actively search for a mate is simply not available, it broadcasts its existence to the void. Over the course of an entire century, it synthesizes a remarkably complex chemical signature that does not dissipate easily in the stagnant waters. It leaves an invisible thread of pheromones suspended in the water column, a chemical ghost that lingers undisturbed for decades. When another wandering member of its kind eventually drifts across this ancient trail 50 years later, it follows the ghost with agonizing slowness. What happens when they finally meet? In the extreme deprivation of the Hadal zone, they might undergo a process of complete cellular homogenization. The two massive entities dissolve their external membranes upon physical contact, their gelatinous bodies merging completely like two droplets of water. Their nervous systems intertwine inextricably, and they become a single, massive, hermaphroditic superorganism. There is no longer a seeker and a sought. The two ancient wanderers permanently annihilate their own individual existences to become something entirely new. This kind of extreme biological pragmatism is profoundly unsettling to the human mind, which is fiercely protective of the self. We build massive physical walls, claim geographical territories, and endlessly celebrate the unique independent spirit of the individual. But the deep ocean does not care about our philosophical attachments to identity and separation. The Mariana Trench is a ruthless, unforgiving crucible that systematically burns away anything that is not absolutely essential for survival. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable fact that our fast-paced, individualized surface lives represent just one possible evolutionary solution, a solution that only works in the warm, bright, energy-rich shallows. In the vast, dark majority of the planet's habitable volume, survival looks like monumental patience. It looks like the total willingness to surrender the self to the darkness. There is another, even more alien possibility hiding in the jagged geological fractures of the Mariana Plate, one that challenges the very foundation of biological science. Throughout our exploration, we have assumed that life in the trench is based on the same fundamental building blocks as life on the surface: deoxyribonucleic acid, proteins, and a carbon-based architectural framework. But the extreme pressures and unique chemical environments of the deepest hydrothermal fissures might harbor what astrobiologists call a shadow biosphere, a completely separate, independent tree of life that originated on its own in the absolute dark. Imagine microscopic organisms that use silicon instead of carbon as their fundamental structural backbone, or bizarre creatures that utilize entirely different chemical solvents than water within their alien cells. These shadow microbes would be completely invisible to our standard biological tests. We could drag a scientific net directly through a thriving cloud of them and definitively declare the water perfectly sterile, simply because we do not know what alternative chemical signatures to look for. If such a shadow biosphere truly exists in the Mariana Trench, it means the Earth has not hosted one single genesis, but two or perhaps many independent origins of life. It means that life is not a fragile, improbable miracle that happened only once in a warm little surface pond, but an inevitable, powerful property of the universe itself. This staggering realization should bring a profound, washing sense of peace to the restless human mind. For so much of our recorded history, humanity has suffered from a kind of deep cosmic loneliness. We have looked up at the vastness of space and the deepness of astronomical time and felt terrifyingly small, burdened by the arrogant belief that we are the sole custodians of the miracle of life in a dead universe. But the unmapped, crushing depths of the Mariana Trench whisper a very different, much more comforting truth. They tell us that life is vast, incredibly varied, and incomprehensibly tough. It does not need our careful protection, and it certainly does not need our constant awareness to thrive and multiply. Long after our shining cities have inevitably crumbled to dust, and our surface world has been completely reshaped by the inexorable drift of the continents, the strange, blind creatures of the abyssal plain will still be there, drifting slowly through the cold, crushing dark, completely undisturbed by our passing. They offer us the ultimate philosophical liberation, the absolute freedom to simply not be the center of the universe. We can finally let go of our existential anxiety, resting securely in the knowledge that the planet is deeply, profoundly alive in ways we cannot even perceive. As the night deepens around you, filling your room with quiet shadows, allow your own physical boundaries to soften and blur, just as the gelatinous creatures of the deep surrender their solid forms to the crushing, eternal embrace of the heavy water. Let the rigid definition of where your physical body ends and the quiet darkness of the room begins dissolve into a comfortable, heavy, sinking stillness. You do not need to be an individual right now. You do not need to carry the heavy weight of your identity, your personal history, or the exhausting responsibilities of the waking world. Like the ancient patient wanderers of the Hadal zone, you can release the constant effort of seeking and simply allow yourself to be absorbed by the profound, welcoming quiet. The deep ocean requires no sudden action, no frantic urgency, and absolutely no complex thought. It only asks for your complete surrender to the stillness. The weight of the water above is not a burden. It is a massive, comforting blanket that seals you away from the demands of tomorrow. Imagine your racing consciousness slowing down, steadily matching the glacial, centuries-long rhythms of the deepest abyss. Every breath you take is a slow, rhythmic ocean tide, pulling you deeper away from the noise and bright light of the surface, sinking you safely down into the tranquil serenity where no light reaches, no pressure harms, and no worries can ever survive. There is nothing left to see, nothing left to do, and absolutely nothing to fear in the absolute, sheltering dark. 66 million years ago, a rock the size of a mountain slammed into the shallow coastal seas of the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released the energy of 100 million nuclear weapons, vaporizing billions of tons of rock, sulfur, and seawater, and launching a choking shroud of debris into the stratosphere that plunged the entire planet into a year-long twilight. On the surface, the global temperature plummeted by nearly 30 degrees Celsius. The surface oceans acidified rapidly, dissolving the delicate calcium carbonate shells of the microscopic plankton, tearing the very foundation out from under the global marine food webs. The mighty mosasaurs and the long-necked plesiosaurs that had ruled the sunlit Cretaceous oceans starved and vanished forever, their massive bodies sinking into the dark to become brief feasts for the deep-sea scavengers. The shallow seas became toxic graveyards. But if you were a creature living in the crushing blackness of the Mariana Trench, 36,000 feet below the apocalyptic chaos of the surface, you would not have noticed a single thing. The catastrophic meteor impact, the single most destructive event in the recent biological history of our planet, was completely irrelevant to the abyss. The unimaginable shockwave was entirely absorbed and dissipated by miles of dense, incompressible fluid. The thick ash cloud could not block a sun that had never penetrated the Hadal zone in the first place. The only subtle change might have been a temporary increase in the slow, silent rain of marine snow, a brief windfall of organic debris falling from the dying world above. The trench is not just a profound geological feature. It is an impenetrable fortress against time and catastrophe. It is the ultimate biological time capsule, completely isolated from the mass extinctions that periodically wipe the terrestrial slate clean. On the surface of the Earth, evolution is driven by the relentless whip of environmental change. Continents drift apart and crash together. Ice ages freeze lush forests into barren tundras, and catastrophic impacts or volcanic eruptions force life to constantly reinvent itself or perish. But the absolute bottom of the ocean is the most stable, unchanging habitat in the entire solar system. For over 100 million years, the physical conditions of the Challenger Deep have remained virtually identical. The water temperature has hovered constantly around 34 degrees Fahrenheit. The pressure has remained a steady, crushing 1,000 atmospheres. The absolute darkness has never once been pierced by the light of a star, ensuring that no sudden shift in solar radiation can ever alter the fundamental energy economy of the abyss. The water chemistry remains locked in a precise cold equilibrium. In an environment that never changes, the brutal driving engine of natural selection slowly grinds to a halt. When a creature is already perfectly adapted to its surroundings, any genetic mutation, any evolutionary deviation from that hard-won perfection is inherently disadvantageous. Biologists call this phenomenon stabilizing selection. It is the powerful conservative force that preserves ancient body plans, creating what Charles Darwin famously termed living fossils. We know that the coelacanth, a bizarre, heavy-scaled fish thought to have gone extinct 65 million years ago, was rediscovered hiding in deep underwater caves, its anatomy completely unchanged since the time of the dinosaurs. We know that the horseshoe crab has crawled across the ocean floor in exactly the same armored shell for 450 million years. But these creatures live in the relatively shallow twilight zones. What ancient, untouched lineages might be hiding in the absolute, unchanging isolation of the deepest Hadal trenches? If we could somehow drain the Mariana Trench and walk across its muddy alien floor, we might find a living museum of the planet's deepest and most obscure biological history. To imagine what might live there, we must look back to the Cambrian explosion, an event over 500 million years ago, when life suddenly diversified into a terrifying array of experimental body plans. Most of those alien-looking lineages went extinct, outcompeted by the faster, smarter ancestors of modern fish and arthropods, but some of them might have simply retreated from the biological arms race. driven down into the dark by faster, more efficient predators in the sunlit shallows. They could have found permanent sanctuary in the crushing pressure where their newly evolved rivals could not physically follow. Imagine a descendant of the Anomalocaris, the first great apex predator of the ancient seas, surviving in the deepest unexplored fractures of the Pacific Plate. It would be a massive creature with a segmented exoskeleton, undulating swimming flaps, and a circular, terrifying mouth lined with sharp serrated plates. But instead of actively hunting trilobites in a shallow, sunlit sea, this Hadal anomalocarid would be a massive, slow-moving scavenger. Its compound eyes would have been long since lost to the darkness, replaced by extremely long, sweeping antennae that feel the subtle vibrations of falling marine snow from miles away. Or perhaps we might find the last surviving remnants of the placoderms, the heavily armored, jawed fishes that utterly dominated the Devonian period over 350 million years ago. Protected from the intense pressure by articulated plates of solid bone, a deep-sea placoderm might lie in ambush buried beneath the yellowish ooze. These unseen creatures would not be evolutionary failures. They would be the ultimate survivors, hardened veterans of a biological war that ended eons before the first mammal ever drew a breath of air. The speculative existence of such ancient, unchanging creatures completely challenges our deeply ingrained, human-centric narrative of progress. We have been culturally conditioned to believe that evolution is a ladder, a constant upward climb toward greater complexity, higher intelligence, and more sophisticated technology. We view our extraordinarily large brains, our complex language, and our tool-making hands as the pinnacle of this biological mandate. We assume that intelligence is the inevitable goal of the universe, but the silent, crushing trench teaches us a fundamentally different and profoundly humbling lesson. Evolution is not a ladder, it is simply a mechanism of fitting in. And once a species fits in perfectly, there is absolutely no biological reason to climb anywhere else. The unmapped entities of the deep do not need to invent fire, build sprawling cities, or map the distant stars to prove their evolutionary worth. Their biological perfection was achieved hundreds of millions of years ago, and their cosmic reward is an eternity of peaceful, uninterrupted stasis. They represent a kind of physical and biological enlightenment, a total, unwavering harmony with an environment so extreme that it permanently isolates them from the chaotic, violent drama of the surface world. When we look down into the unimaginable depths of the trench, we are not looking at a primitive, backward past that we have successfully transcended. We are looking at a masterclass in profound endurance. We are looking at creatures that have figured out how to exist without the constant, exhausting need to become something else. This concept of evolutionary stasis, of a quiet, dark perfection that requires absolutely no further effort, is a powerful antidote to the relentless psychological pressure of our modern human lives. Every single day, we are bombarded by the societal demand to improve, to adapt, to learn, and to grow. We are told that we must constantly strive for a better future, a faster mind, and a more efficient body. This psychological pressure is exhausting, and it is a uniquely human burden, a symptom of our hyperactive, surface-dwelling brains. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of your room, you do not need to evolve. You do not need to improve. You do not need to be productive. As you lie there, feeling the weight of the blankets over you, you can grant yourself the profound permission to simply be exactly as you are, without any expectation of progress or change. Imagine your mind adopting the perfect, unchanging stillness of the Hadal zone. Let the heavy, dark water of the trench wash away the frantic need to do something or to become something. In the deepest unmapped canyons of the earth, there is no future to strive for, and absolutely no past to regret. There is only the long, calm, perfectly stable present, stretching out for millions of years. As your breathing slows and deepens, imagine yourself sinking gently down into that ancient, undisturbed sanctuary. Feel the cool, heavy darkness wrap around you like a thick, protective shell, completely isolating you from the noisy, demanding surface world. You are entirely safe in this deep, quiet place. You have survived the day. You have navigated the turbulent currents of your waking life, and now you have reached the absolute bottom where the water is still and the pressure is a comforting embrace. Let the vast silence of the abyss fill your mind, silencing the frantic echoes of the sunlit world and guiding you gently down into a deep, dreamless, and perfectly ancient sleep. One of the greatest paradoxes of our ongoing quest to understand the deep ocean is that our intense human curiosity is fundamentally thwarted by the brutal, uncompromising laws of thermodynamics and fluid dynamics. For over a century, since the pioneering days when the crew of the HMS Challenger first dragged their hemp ropes across the abyssal plains, human beings have desperately tried to pull the secrets of the Hadal zone up into the bright, sunlit world. We are driven by a deeply ingrained, almost obsessive need to catalog, to photograph, to measure, and to display the natural world in our sterile laboratories and sprawling museums. We want to look the alien in the eye, but the Mariana Trench violently resists this kind of biological extraction. The physical boundary between the surface and the absolute bottom is not just a matter of distance. It is an insurmountable wall of pressure, temperature, and atmospheric chemistry. When a robotic lander or a deep-sea trawl net manages to capture a biological specimen from 36,000 feet down and begins the agonizingly slow ascent to the surface, it is subjecting that creature to an apocalyptic physical trauma. For every 33 feet the specimen rises, the crushing weight of the water decreases by 1 full atmosphere. Over the course of a 7-mile journey upward, the creature experiences a decompression of over 1,000 atmospheres. To understand the catastrophic violence of this process, we have to look at what happens at the microscopic cellular level. The animals of the deep, as we have discovered, do not possess the gas-filled swim bladders that shallow water fish use to maintain buoyancy, because those bladders would instantly implode under the weight of the trench. Instead, their bodies are entirely suffused with water and stabilized by complex piezolites like trimethylamine oxide, which act as a microscopic scaffolding, preventing their proteins from folding in on themselves. But this miraculous biochemical adaptation is entirely dependent on the presence of extreme, crushing pressure to function correctly. When that pressure is slowly removed during the ascent, the structural integrity of the creature's biology completely fails in reverse. Without the immense weight of the ocean pressing inward, the stabilizing chemicals lose their molecular tension. The proteins that make up the animal's muscles, organs, and skin begin to unravel and lose their shape. The gelatinous tissues, no longer held together by the compressive force of the abyss, literally begin to melt. Furthermore, as the specimen is dragged up from the near-freezing depths of 34 degrees Fahrenheit into the warm, sunlit waters of the tropical Pacific, the sudden spike in temperature accelerates this biological breakdown, denaturing whatever cellular structures manage to survive the decompression. By the time the net is finally hauled onto the deck of the research vessel, the scientists do not find a terrifying, majestic monster of the deep. They find a ruined, formless mass of gelatinous tissue, a biological puddle that bears absolutely no resemblance to the elegant, highly structured organism that was swimming just a few hours earlier. This devastating physical reality introduces a profound and humbling limitation to human knowledge. It means that the vast majority of the biological specimens we have successfully recovered from the deep ocean are essentially ruined artifacts, like buildings that have been subjected to a massive earthquake before we could photograph them. We are forced to guess at their true living architecture based entirely on the collapsed rubble of their bodies. But this limitation points to an even more tantalizing and speculative possibility regarding the creatures that still hide in the unmapped, unexplored darkness of the Mariana Plate. If a relatively robust muscular creature like a Hadal snailfish or a giant amphipod is severely damaged by the journey to the surface, what happens to the creatures that are inherently fragile? What about the organisms that are entirely composed of delicate water-filled tissues, creatures so perfectly balanced by the crushing pressure that they possess no hard structures, no scales, and no solid anchoring points whatsoever? It is entirely biologically plausible that the deepest, quietest regions of the trench are dominated by massive gelatinous entities that simply cannot be collected, photographed, or even observed by our current technological methods, because the very act of interacting with them destroys them instantly. Consider the siphonophores, a bizarre order of hydrozoans found in the shallower deep sea. They are not single animals, but massive drifting colonies of highly specialized individual organisms called zooids, all cloning themselves and linking together to function as one single, terrifyingly long entity. Some siphonophores in the twilight zone have been measured at over 150 feet long, making them among the longest animals on the planet. Their bodies are little more than strings of translucent, venomous glass, drifting silently on the ocean currents like deadly, invisible spider webs. Now, transpose this colonial body plan down into the absolute calm of the Challenger Deep, an environment where there are no strong currents to tear a fragile body apart and no fast-moving surface predators to bite through delicate tissues. In the completely undisturbed high-pressure sanctuary of the trench, there is no biological limit to how massive a colonial gelatinous organism could grow. Imagine a Hadal siphonophore, a silent drifting web of bioluminescent nervous tissue and stinging cells that stretches for over 1,000 feet through the black water. It does not swim. It simply hangs suspended in a state of perfect neutral buoyancy, casting a microscopic net across acres of the abyssal plain. Its individual stinging cells are perfectly calibrated to sense the faintest microscopic vibrations of falling marine snow or the slow crawling movement of a blind crustacean on the sediment far below. This magnificent, terrifying creature could exist right now, at this very second, drifting through the dark canyons of the earth. But we may never be able to prove it. If a human-piloted bathyscaphe or a heavy titanium-armored robotic submersible were to descend into the immediate vicinity of this giant Hadal web, the outcome would be instantaneous destruction. Our submersibles are loud, heavy, and violent machines. They maneuver using powerful electric thrusters that generate massive, chaotic hydrodynamic wakes. Long before the narrow, blinding beam of the submarine's halogen spotlight could illuminate the translucent, ghost-like tissues of the giant siphonophore, the violent turbulence created by the vehicle's propellers would hit the creature like a hurricane. The delicate, water-filled zooids evolved to exist in an environment of absolute, perfectly still water, would be violently torn apart, shredded into millions of microscopic fragments, and scattered into the dark before the onboard cameras could register a single frame of its existence. We would drive our multi-million-dollar technological marvel right through the center of a 1,000-foot-long biological masterpiece, and we would report back to the surface that the area was entirely empty. This is the ultimate observer effect applied to deep-sea biology. Our very methods of exploration are violently incompatible with the delicate high-pressure reality of the abyss. To look at the deepest trench is to alter it, and to try to capture its most fragile inhabitants is to completely obliterate them. There is a strange, melancholy beauty in this realization. It means that the Mariana Trench will never be completely conquered by human curiosity. It will never be fully illuminated, catalogued, and displayed in the bright, noisy halls of a surface museum. It refuses to be reduced to a collection of interesting facts on a screen. It demands to remain in the dark, protected by an impenetrable fortress of crushing physics and absolute silence. In an age where human technology has mapped every square inch of the continents, where satellites track our every movement, and where the collective knowledge of the entire species is available at the touch of a screen, there is something profoundly comforting about a place that absolutely refuses to be known. The trench stands as a silent monument to the uncontrollable, unobservable mysteries of the natural world. It is a reminder that the planet does not belong to us, that it does not exist for our entertainment or our scientific edification, and that some secrets are meant to stay buried in the crushing ancient dark. As you lie in the quiet safety of your room, allow this concept of the unobservable to wash over you, bringing with it a profound sense of psychological relief. In your waking life, you are constantly observed, constantly measured, and constantly required to present a recognizable form to the world around you. You carry the heavy burden of being seen. But tonight, as you transition into sleep, you can let go of that exhausting performance. Sleep is, much like the delicate creatures of the Hadal zone, a fragile, deeply personal state that cannot be forced or directly observed without destroying it. If you try too hard to watch yourself fall asleep, if you turn the harsh, analytical spotlight of your conscious mind upon the process, the delicate transition shatters, and you are jolted back to the surface of wakefulness. You cannot capture sleep. You can only surrender to it. Imagine your own mind as one of those giant, fragile, drifting entities of the deep ocean. It does not need to be solid right now. It does not need to hold a specific shape or defend itself against the currents of the day. Let the heavy, comforting pressure of the dark room act, like the crushing weight of the deep ocean, holding your tired thoughts gently in place, allowing them to slowly dissolve and expand into the vast, quiet emptiness. You are completely safe from observation here. You are perfectly anonymous in the dark. Let the turbulent wake of your daily anxieties dissipate far above you, while you sink effortlessly downward, drifting deeper and deeper into the untouchable, unmapped sanctuary of a perfect, silent rest. The Mariana Trench is often conceptualized simply as a static geographical feature, an unimaginably deep valley permanently etched into the floor of the western Pacific Ocean. We inherently think of it as a dark, silent container, a passive void waiting to be filled by the slow, continuous rain of marine snow or the occasional sinking corpse of a surface giant. But this quiet image is a fundamental misinterpretation of the Earth's violently dynamic geology. The trench is absolutely not a container. It is an active planetary-scale machine. It is a massive slow-motion mouth, endlessly consuming the very crust of the Earth. The Pacific Plate, an immense slab of solid rock that forms the foundation of the largest ocean on the planet, is not stationary. It is constantly moving, born from the fiery mid-ocean ridges thousands of miles away and relentlessly pushing westward at a rate of a few inches per year. As it travels across the globe, a journey taking roughly 170 million years to complete, it accumulates a thick, heavy blanket of historical debris. Microscopic shells of dead plankton, fine dust blown from ancient terrestrial deserts, crushed remnants of sunken coral reefs and the towering basalt peaks of extinct underwater volcanoes. All of this rests heavily upon the back of the Pacific Plate. But when this ancient burdened slab finally reaches the Mariana Plate, its journey violently ends. Because it is older, colder, and significantly denser, the Pacific Plate is forced downward, plunging at a steep angle beneath the Mariana Plate and descending straight into the superheated semi-molten mantle of the Earth. The Challenger Deep is simply the physical crease of this colossal bending, the exact topological point where the ocean floor is dragged down to be completely annihilated. Every single day, thousands of tons of ancient rock and accumulated biological history are pulled into the subduction zone to be completely melted down and recycled back into the glowing magma of the planet. It is an act of total, unavoidable geological erasure. To understand the extreme biology of this specific environment, we must try to imagine what it is actually like to live on a planetary conveyor belt that is slowly rolling toward a massive incinerator. The unknown creatures that inhabit the absolute bottom of the trench are not just surviving the crushing pressure of 1,000 atmospheres. They are living on a landscape that is fundamentally temporary, a surface literally sinking beneath their feet. Yet, in this incredibly hostile, unstable environment, life does not simply flee. It adapts, and it actively exploits the slow-motion destruction. Deep within the thick yellowish mud that coats the floor of the trench, biologists have already discovered a subterranean ecosystem of microscopic organisms known as endoliths. These are extremophile bacteria that live entirely inside the solid rock itself. They use highly specialized biological acids to dissolve the dense basalt, surviving entirely on the faint chemical energy released by the crushing, grinding friction of the two massive tectonic plates tearing against each other. They represent an alien branch of biology relying on the sheer mechanical energy of continental drift. That is what happened in our known microscopic reality. That is the factual foundation. But tonight, we are going to imagine something far more massive. If we allow our minds to push deliberately beyond the limits of our microscopic discoveries, we can conceptualize macroscopic creatures that might have evolved to perfectly exploit this planetary recycling center. What if the deepest, most inaccessible folds of the Mariana subduction zone harbor giant organisms uniquely adapted to the relentless destruction of the seafloor? Imagine a creature visually resembling an enormous, heavily armored polychaete worm, perhaps 10 feet long, its segmented body encased entirely in thick overlapping plates of biological iron sulfide. It is completely blind, entirely deaf, and physically isolated from the open water column miles above. This Hadal lithotroph does not swim. Instead, it burrows directly into the grinding interface where the Pacific Plate slides agonizingly beneath the Mariana Plate. It possesses a massive specialized grinding apparatus at its head, a biological drill capable of chewing relentlessly through the compressed sediment and fracturing basalt. As the tectonic plate is dragged downward toward the boiling mantle, the ambient temperature of the rock rises, and mineral-rich water is violently squeezed out of the descending crust by the mounting geological pressure. Our speculative iron-plated burrower lives exactly in this volatile transition zone, actively following the sinking rock downward, feeding voraciously on the rich chemical slurry squeezed from the dying plate. It exists in an environment of unimaginable mechanical stress. When the descending plate finally reaches a critical depth where the ambient heat becomes completely unsurvivable, the giant worm simply, slowly burrows upward, staying perfectly balanced in the narrow habitable zone of the subduction conveyor belt. This theoretical creature would be a silent witness to the ultimate destruction of the surface world's deepest history. As it slowly chews through the compressed sediment, it might consume the crushed fossilized remains of ancient marine reptiles, the distinct chemical signatures of forgotten asteroid impacts, and the geological dust of terrestrial mountains that completely eroded away millions of years before the first dinosaur walked the earth. It literally eats the past. This points us toward the profound philosophical reality of the Mariana Trench. We, as humans living on the sunlit surface, are deeply, almost pathologically obsessed with the concept of preservation. We build massive stone monuments, curate climate-controlled museums, and frantically archive our digital data because we are fundamentally terrified of being forgotten. We desperately want our history and our individual identities to be permanent. We view the erosion of memory as a profound tragedy. But the Earth itself is absolutely not interested in preservation. The Earth is an uncaring recycling engine. It has absolutely no use for museums. It takes the highest mountains and the most vibrant biological eras, relentlessly grinds them down, pulls them forcefully into the mantle, and melts them back into the anonymous churning magma from which they were initially born. The Mariana Trench is the exact physical location where this planetary erasure takes place, the dark drain where the history of the world is scrubbed completely clean. There is a strange, radical, and deeply soothing comfort to be found in this massive geological annihilation. If the Earth itself does not cling desperately to its own deep history, if the planet is perfectly willing to swallow 170 million years of history and melt it down into absolute nothingness, then perhaps we do not need to carry the exhausting burden of our own past quite so tightly. The accumulated anxieties of your past, the mistakes you have made over the years, the painful moments you endlessly replay in your mind, and the crushing expectations you have meticulously built for your future. All of these psychological burdens seem overwhelmingly massive on the surface. They feel like solid, immovable mountains of stress. But when they are viewed closely through the clarifying lens of geological time, when they are placed at the very edge of the Challenger Deep, they are revealed to be incredibly small, fragile, and temporary things. The grinding reality of the trench reminds us gently that impermanence is not a tragedy to be mourned. It is the fundamental operational baseline of the entire universe. Everything that is built will eventually, inevitably be unbuilt. Everything that is remembered will eventually be forgotten, pulled down into the quiet, crushing dark to be dissolved and recycled. This is not a reason for existential despair. It is a profound, liberating permission to finally let go of the things you cannot control. As you lie completely still in your bed, listening to the quiet rhythm of the night, allow yourself to practice this geological erasure. Imagine your own mind as the vast, heavy Pacific plate, burdened with the thick, accumulated sediment of your entire day. You are currently carrying the thousands of small, exhausting decisions, the stressful conversations, the persistent worries, and the lingering mental noise that have drifted down to settle heavily upon your consciousness. But you do not need to carry this immense weight forever. Imagine the leading edge of your consciousness slowly approaching the deep, quiet, welcoming subduction zone of sleep. As you exhale slowly, allow the heavy, burdened edge of that mental plate to gently slip downward, sliding effortlessly into the dark, silent void of the abyss. Feel the anxieties and the accumulated history of the day being firmly pulled away from you, sinking steadily down into a place where they will be completely melted down and peacefully dissolved. You do not need to preserve them. You do not need to archive your stress. Let the silent, ancient machinery of the trench consume your restless thoughts, grinding them down into absolute quiet. The heavy water above is perfectly calm. The dark is perfectly still, and the slow, inevitable pull of the deep ocean is drawing you safely away from the noisy surface, guiding you down into total peaceful emptiness, where absolutely nothing remains but the eternal breathing of the earth itself. We inherently assume that the deepest, darkest places on our planet are places of absolute, terrifying silence. It is a highly logical assumption for a surface-dwelling terrestrial mammal to make. When we walk into a deep cave or an empty room, the complete absence of light is almost always accompanied by the comforting absence of noise. But the ocean is a fundamentally different physical medium than the volatile atmosphere we breathe. Water is a dense, incredibly heavy, relatively incompressible fluid. And precisely because of this tight molecular structure, it is a spectacular conductor of acoustic energy. Sound travels at roughly 1,500 meters per second in seawater, nearly 4.5 times faster than it does in the air above us. Furthermore, low-frequency sound waves can travel for thousands of miles through the ocean with remarkably little loss of energy, trapped in a deep, highly efficient acoustic highway known to oceanographers as the SOFAR channel. Therefore, the Mariana Trench is absolutely not a silent, dead void. It is, in fact, an immense geological acoustic funnel, a massive parabolic dish carved into the Earth's crust that catches and concentrates the sonic debris of the entire Pacific Basin. For many decades, our understanding of this extreme acoustic environment was purely theoretical. The staggering engineering challenge of deploying a highly sensitive microphone 36,000 feet down, where the crushing pressure of 1,000 atmospheres would instantly shatter standard glass and warp solid steel, seemed an impossible task. But in 2015, a collaborative team of researchers from Oregon State University, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the United States Coast Guard decided to finally listen to the absolute abyss. They engineered a highly specialized hydrophone encased entirely in a massive, extraordinarily thick-walled titanium pressure housing. It took over 6 hours for this heavily armored instrument to simply fall through the water column and finally settle onto the soft, yellowish, ancient sediment of the Challenger Deep. The researchers left it there for 23 days, continuously recording the acoustic reality of the most remote place on planet Earth. When they finally retrieved the hydrophone and analyzed the resulting digital recordings, they did not find the serene, dead silence they had quietly anticipated. Instead, they found a deafening, chaotic cacophony. The trench was completely filled with the low, terrifying, subterranean groans of massive earthquakes rumbling deep within the Earth's mantle, the grinding, relentless friction of the ancient Pacific Plate violently sliding beneath the Mariana Plate. They captured the distinct rhythmic mechanical thrum of the propellers from massive commercial container ships passing miles above on the surface, a stark, sobering reminder that human noise pollution now reaches the absolute bottom of the world. But most astonishingly, they heard biology. They recorded the haunting, deeply complex calls of baleen whales echoing down through 7 miles of pitch-black water. They even captured a strange, highly complex metallic sound, a bizarre 5-part acoustic signature spanning a massive frequency range from a deep rumbling 38 hertz up to a high, sharp, metallic 8,000 hertz. This strange noise, which scientists later dubbed the Western Pacific biotwang, was eventually identified as the previously unknown call of a minke whale, bouncing, echoing, and reflecting off the sheer rock walls of the trench. The absolute darkness of the Hadal zone is completely flooded with sound. Because light is completely irrelevant here, sound is the ultimate undisputed currency of survival. If you want to deeply understand the unknown creatures that live in the deepest unmapped fissures of the Mariana Plate, you must imagine biology that has entirely abandoned the visual spectrum and dedicated tens of millions of years of uninterrupted evolution to the absolute mastery of acoustic energy. On the surface, intelligent predators like bats and dolphins use sophisticated echolocation to navigate and find prey. But in the trench, acoustic adaptation could theoretically be pushed to a terrifying, highly weaponized extreme. Imagine an undiscovered, massive creature, perfectly evolved to exploit the dense sound-conducting properties of the deep ocean. This speculative entity might not have eyes, teeth, or even the ability to swim rapidly. Instead, its entire body could be shaped exactly like a massive, fleshy parabolic reflector, perhaps 20 feet across, composed entirely of highly specialized dense gelatinous tissues designed to perfectly focus incoming sound waves. It hovers silently in the freezing black water, a living satellite dish permanently tuned to the incredibly low frequencies of the abyss. This creature does not hunt by actively chasing its prey. It hunts by listening with an acuity that makes our most advanced military sonar systems look entirely primitive. It can distinctly hear the microscopic rhythmic clicking of a giant amphipod's mandibles scraping against a sunken whalebone miles away. It can detect the subtle hydrodynamic wake of a translucent snailfish gliding through the dark. And when it finally locates a potential meal, it does not strike with claws or jaws. It uses sound as a physical concussive weapon. By rapidly contracting a specialized, heavily muscled acoustic organ located precisely at the focal point of its parabolic body, it fires a highly concentrated burst of low-frequency sound. This acoustic bullet travels through the dense water at 3,000 miles per hour, striking the prey with enough physical force to instantly stun it, entirely disrupting its delicate nervous system and sending it drifting helplessly into the waiting, enveloping folds of the predator's digestive cavity. But the ultimate mastery of sound in the Hadal zone points to an even more profound and philosophically challenging possibility regarding the very nature of intelligence itself. We humans are deeply, almost pathologically attached to the concept of the centralized brain. We define intelligence entirely by the rapid, localized firing of billions of neurons packed tightly inside a single, solid skull. We inherently assume that a mind must be a discrete, highly concentrated, individualized entity. But evolution in the deep ocean is absolutely not constrained by our narrow terrestrial assumptions. What if the unique acoustic properties of the trench have allowed for the development of a completely different kind of awareness? Imagine a collective, distributed intelligence that does not exist within a single physical body, but is instead spread across thousands of individual, structurally simple organisms communicating seamlessly over vast distances. These creatures might use ultra-low frequency sound waves, waves that are far below the threshold of human hearing, to transmit complex chemical and environmental data to one another. Because these particular sound waves can travel for hundreds of miles through the uninterrupted water column of the trench, the network of communication could theoretically span the entire length of the Mariana Plate. In this speculative scenario, a single organism is not intelligent, just as a single isolated neuron in a human brain is not intelligent. But together, communicating slowly and continuously through the dark, dense water, they form a massive, completely decentralized acoustic mind. This would be an intelligence that operates on a timescale that is entirely alien to our fast-paced human existence. A single thought, a single coordinated biological decision, might take weeks or even months to fully formulate and transmit across the sprawling network. It would be a slow, deliberate, and unimaginably ancient consciousness perfectly adapted to the glacial, unchanging pace of the deep ocean. It would have absolutely no use for technology, no desire to build monuments, and no destructive impulse to conquer its environment. It would simply exist in a state of eternal acoustic contemplation, quietly listening to the deep groans of the tectonic plates, the distant echoing calls of passing whales, and the subtle shifting cold currents of the abyss. The possible existence of such a slow, distributed mind forces us to gently but firmly deconstruct our own profound anthropocentrism. We have spent centuries gazing out at the stars, desperately broadcasting radio signals into the cold vacuum of space, constantly searching for an intelligence that exactly mirrors our own frantic, centralized technological awareness. We are secretly terrified by the prospect that we might be the only thinkers in a cold, dead universe. But the silent, unseen depths of the Mariana Trench whisper a radically different, deeply comforting philosophical truth. They gently suggest that consciousness is absolutely not a rare, fragile anomaly confined only to the sunlit surface, but a flexible, highly resilient property of the universe that can easily take forms we can barely even comprehend. The trench reminds us that there are deeply valid ways of knowing the world that have absolutely nothing to do with building spaceships, writing complex mathematical equations, or achieving rapid technological progress. There is a profound, undeniable biological validity in simply being a quiet, slow receptor of the Earth's natural vibrations. We do not need to be the only thinkers. We simply need to be one small, noisy part of a planet that is constantly thinking and feeling in a million different, unimaginably slow ways. This profound realization offers a massive psychological liberation. You do not need to carry the exhausting, heavy burden of being the most important, hyper-aware entity in the universe. Your mind does not always have to be sharp, fast, and constantly processing the rapid, chaotic information of the surface world. Tonight, as you lie in the quiet safety of your room, you can give your mind the profound, absolute permission to abandon its centralized, frantic activity. Imagine your thoughts deliberately slowing down, stretching out into long, low-frequency waves, exactly like the deep acoustic signals endlessly echoing through the Challenger Deep. You do not need to hold on to any single, distinct idea. Let the rigid boundaries of your individual worries completely dissolve and spread outward, becoming slow, gentle vibrations that fade peacefully into the dark. Imagine the immense pressure of the deep ocean not as a crushing physical force, but as a heavy, highly comforting acoustic blanket, absorbing all the high-pitched anxiety and the sharp, jagged edges of your daily stress. As you breathe in, slowly draw the cool, quiet, ancient energy of the deep into your lungs. As you breathe out, release a slow, silent wave of total relaxation that travels down through your body, unknotting your muscles and settling your heart rate into the slow, eternal rhythm of the abyss. There is absolutely nothing you need to figure out right now. There is no problem that requires your immediate, sharp attention. You are simply a quiet observer, drifting effortlessly in the vast, resonant darkness. Let the deep eternal silence of the trench become your own internal silence. Surrender your conscious mind to the slow, heavy currents of the deep, allowing yourself to sink past the noisy surface of wakefulness, down into the pristine, absolute calm where the only sound is the slow, steady heartbeat of the earth itself, guiding you gently into a profound and dreamless sleep. We have spent the entirety of our biological and cultural history gazing upwards and outwards, obsessively seeking to map the visible universe and bring everything under the domain of human understanding. We have planted flags on the dusty surface of the moon, sent robotic emissaries beyond the heliosphere, and mapped the human genome with astonishing precision. We are a species defined by our relentless drive to illuminate the dark, to name the unknown, and to conquer the inaccessible. But the Mariana Trench stands in absolute silent defiance of this deep-seated terrestrial arrogance. It is a massive geological scar on the face of the earth that fundamentally refuses to be conquered, a place that actively and violently resists our attempts to drag its secrets into the harsh, sterilizing light of the surface world. When we lower our heavily armored submersibles down into the Challenger Deep, descending past 36,000 feet through water that is hovering just above the freezing point, we are not mastering the environment. We are merely surviving it for a few fleeting, incredibly fragile moments. The trench does not welcome our brilliant halogen spotlights or the noisy, churning thrusters of our machines. To the ancient, perfectly adapted entities that call this crushing darkness their permanent home, our technological marvels are nothing more than violent, transient intrusions, loud and chaotic disruptions that signify absolutely nothing in the grand, sweeping timescale of the deep ocean. This brings us to the most profound and liberating philosophical paradox of our entire speculative journey. Throughout human history, our philosophers and scientists have endlessly debated the nature of existence, often centering the entire universe squarely around the human capacity for observation. We have arrogant proverbs that question whether a tree falling in an empty forest makes a sound if there is no human ear present to hear it. We subconsciously act as though the natural world is a vast, elaborate stage play, completely dependent on our continuous attention to keep running. But the unmapped, unexplored canyons of the Mariana Plate effortlessly shatter this human-centric illusion. The bizarre, magnificent creatures we've imagined tonight, the massive, fragile siphonophores, drifting like invisible glass webs, the iron-plated lithotrophs slowly chewing their way through the grinding tectonic boundary, the sprawling, distributed acoustic mines conversing in ultra-low frequencies over hundreds of miles. They are completely oblivious to our existence. They do not need our careful observation to validate their reality. They have been thriving in the absolute crushing blackness for tens of millions of years, perfectly content in a biosphere that is fundamentally disconnected from the sun, the seasons, and the chaotic rise and fall of surface civilizations. They are the ultimate proof that the Earth is not a human possession, but a vastly complex, incredibly diverse engine of life that operates entirely on its own terms. If you are lying in your bed right now, listening to these words, you are a product of the surface world's incredible volatility. You are the improbable result of a highly specific chain of historical contingencies, including the apocalyptic asteroid impact 66 million years ago that cleared the global stage for the mammals, the shifting of ancient climates that forced our primate ancestors out of the trees, and the rapid, frenetic development of the human brain. Your existence is a frantic, noisy, beautifully complex accident, but far beneath you, separated by 7 miles of heavy, silent water, There is a parallel Earth that completely ignored all of those contingencies. The Mariana Trench is a world that never needed an asteroid to reset its biological clocks. It is an environment that has maintained a state of serene, unchanging equilibrium since before the first dinosaurs walked the continents. It is a place of profound, eternal patience. The creatures that live there do not experience the agonizing passage of time as a rushing river constantly pulling them toward an unknown future. They experience time as a deep, stagnant pool. They measure their long, quiet lives in centuries and millennia, completely unburdened by the frantic terrestrial need to build, to achieve, or to leave a lasting legacy. They simply exist, perfectly integrated into an environment that is so extreme and demanding that simply surviving is the highest possible form of biological enlightenment. There is a profound, deeply washing psychological comfort to be found in this specific realization. In our modern, surface-dwelling lives, we are constantly crushed by the invisible weight of expectations, the endless demands of our society, and the deeply internalized belief that we must always be hyper-aware, hyper-productive, and constantly engaged with the problems of the world. We are told from a very young age that our value is directly tied to our visible output, our speed, and our ability to conquer the challenges placed in front of us. We carry the heavy burden of consciousness like a physical weight upon our shoulders. But the absolute darkness of the Hadal zone offers a radical, beautiful alternative. It offers the philosophical liberation of total irrelevance. You do not always have to be the center of the universe. The planet does not require your constant, exhausting vigilance to keep spinning. Right now, at this exact moment, there are massive, slow-moving creatures drifting through the pitch-black water of the Challenger Deep, entirely at peace in their crushing, silent reality. They do not know your name, they do not care about your anxieties, and they are completely unaffected by the mistakes you feel you have made today. Their serene, uninterrupted existence is a gentle reminder that life is vastly larger, older, and far more resilient than our small, localized terrestrial dramas. As you prepare your mind for the final descent into sleep, I want you to actively borrow the perfect, unchanging stillness of the Mariana Trench. Allow the physical darkness of your bedroom to become the absolute, comforting blackness of the Hadal zone. Imagine the immense, unimaginably heavy volume of the Pacific Ocean pressing down from above, not as a destructive force, but as a massive, impenetrable shield of water. This shield perfectly isolates you from the frantic noise, the harsh lights, and the exhausting demands of the surface world. The thousands of miles of ocean act as a buffer, completely silencing the turbulent storms of your waking life. There is no weather here at the bottom of the world. There are no sudden changes, no looming deadlines, and absolutely no expectations. There is only the slow, rhythmic, eternal breathing of the earth itself, the deep tectonic groans and the gentle icy currents moving through the dark. Feel your own physical body becoming heavy and deeply relaxed, sinking softly into your mattress exactly as a heavy stone slowly settles into the soft, ancient sediment of the abyssal plain. Your muscles are unwinding, releasing the tight, coiled tension of the day, surrendering completely to the gentle pull of gravity. Your mind, which has been racing and darting like a frightened fish in the sunlit shallows, is now steadily slowing down. Let your thoughts drift and diffuse into the dark water, losing their sharp, stressful edges and becoming vague, slow-moving shadows. You do not need to hold on to them anymore. You do not need to analyze them or force them into coherent shapes. Let them completely dissolve into the vast, quiet emptiness. You are transitioning into a state of deep primitive rest, returning to a biological baseline that is millions of years older than human consciousness. You are joining the silent, unseen majority of the planet, the ancient entities that simply exist in the quiet dark, without the exhausting need to understand why. Listen to the steady, rhythmic sound of your own breathing. With every slow inhalation, you are drawing in the profound, cooling peace of the deep ocean. With every long, gentle exhalation, you are releasing the last lingering remnants of your surface anxieties, letting them float upwards and completely away from you, rising towards a surface you no longer have to care about. You are perfectly safe in this deep, hidden place. You are entirely protected by the crushing, comforting weight of the silence. There is absolutely nothing left for you to do tonight. The world above can simply wait. It will continue its noisy, chaotic spin without you, and you are entirely free to simply rest. Let the heavy, perfect darkness envelop you completely. You are sinking deeper now, drifting further away from the light, completely letting go of the need to be known, the need to be seen, and the need to be awake. Surrender yourself entirely to the quiet, ancient embrace of the absolute bottom of the world, and allow the peaceful, undisturbed darkness to guide you gently into a deep, heavy, and perfectly restorative sleep.